Hey guys, tonight we are going back 70,000 years, deep into the last ice age, when the world looked familiar in some ways but utterly alien in others. Picture yourself standing on the edge of a wide plain in eastern Africa. The air is sharp and dry, carrying the scent of dust and wild grasses. Herds of antelope flicker like moving shadows across the horizon, their hooves kicking up thin streams of earth into a sky that feels far larger and emptier than the one you know. Behind you, your small band of hunter-gatherers is busy at the campfire, and you're already dreading the night because it means more smoke in your hair and the possibility of lions prowling nearby. The year is roughly 70,000 BCE. No cities, no farms, no just you, your family, and whatever tools you can sharpen out of flint before your fingers freeze in the evening chill. And you probably won't survive this century, but don't worry, very few of your kind will. Before we drift further, here's a quick invitation. If you enjoy slipping into these ancient stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more calm history journeys. Drop your current location and local time in the comments. I love seeing our little tribe stretched across the modern world while we huddle together around this fire of words. Tonight's story is about survival against odds that almost erased us, so let's keep each other company as we drift off. And now, close your eyes because the Ice Age is waiting. You trudge forward into a world that is colder, harsher, and less forgiving than almost anything you can imagine today. At 70,000 BCE, the planet was locked inside the late Pleistocene, a chapter of the Ice Age marked by cycles of cooling and warming driven by the Earth's orbit, its tilt, and the winds of glaciers sprawling across continents. Imagine standing in northern Europe. If you were foolish enough to be there, you wouldn't find London, Paris, or Berlin. Instead, you'd find walls of ice higher than skyscrapers, glittering under a weak sun. The Laurentide and Fennoscandian ice sheets were like frozen continents in themselves, grinding mountains down, swallowing rivers, and pushing animals southward in a frozen migration none of them volunteered for. But in Africa, where you stand, life is both abundant and precarious. Grasslands stretch endlessly, broken by thorny acacia trees and the occasional rocky outcrop that looks perfect for leopards to lurk in. The rains come in erratic bursts, feeding rivers that swell one year and vanish the next. You survive because your ancestors have adapted to this instability. They know the trails of gazelles. They know which tubers can be dug up even in the dry season. They know that fire is more than warmth. It's the difference between warding off hyenas and becoming their midnight snack. And yet what you don't know is that far across the ocean, deep under the crust of Sumatra, a force is building that will make all your survival skills look like child's play. The Ice Age climate is not uniform. It's a patchwork quilt stitched together with extremes. Imagine shifting suddenly from the savannas of Africa to the steppes of Central Asia. Here the wind knifes across a sea of grasses, carrying dust so thick it turns sunsets into blood-red smears. Herds of mammoth plod along, their shaggy coats rippling in the cold, while hunters not unlike you trail behind, hoping for scraps or daring to test their flint-tipped spears against giants that could flatten them in a single charge. Further east, in what would one day be China, forests cling stubbornly to river valleys, feeding populations of deer and boar. And in Australia, not yet fully cut off by seas, marsupial giants lumber through eucalyptus groves, unaware that the sky above them will one day darken with ash from halfway around the world. What holds all of this together is rhythm. The Ice Age breathes in long, slow cycles. Glaciers advance, seas retreat, deserts expand, and then eventually things reverse. But to you, crouched in a hut of woven branches, the only rhythm that matters is the pounding of your own heart. When the grass rustles at night, you are one of only a few tens of thousands of Homo sapiens alive. Your species is young, experimental, and frankly still in the beta testing phase. You don't yet dominate the planet. You share it with Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans somewhere in Asia, and maybe even other mysterious cousins, whose bones haven't yet been found. You are part of a family tree that is crowded, messy, and not guaranteed to succeed. If the coming centuries go badly, your line might vanish entirely, leaving nothing but teeth in the dirt for future scientists to argue over. Still, for now, the world is alive with sound. In Africa, cicadas buzz like broken electrical wires, birds scream warnings from treetops. The cough of a leopard rolls across the night like distant thunder. Fires crackle, sending sparks into a starfield so dense it looks like spilled flour. In colder regions, silence reigns more heavily. Snow muffles the footfalls of wolves and the crunch of reindeer hooves. Glaciers creak like living beasts as they grind their way downhill. Imagine that silence pressing against your ears, broken only by your own breath freezing into mist. That is the soundtrack of the late Pleistocene, a mix of noise and nothingness, life and emptiness, heat and bitter cold. Now let's take a closer look at the ecosystems. Africa is humanity's stronghold. Savannas support zebras, wildebeest, giraffes, and the predators that stalk them. Coastal zones provide fish, shellfish, and seabirds, vital protein when the land runs dry. Rainforests, though smaller than today, hold monkeys, fruits, and medicines waiting to be discovered. You and your kind have mastered none of these fully, but you dabble in all of them, like chefs trying out recipes with no cookbook and very sharp knives. Outside Africa, ecosystems sprawl in wilder directions. In Eurasia, mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant elk rule the steppes. Saber-toothed cats, though fading, still cast long shadows. In the Americas, humans have not yet arrived, so giant sloths, terror birds, and glyptodons live unchallenged. Australia's megafauna include kangaroos, the size of trucks, and wombats that could crush your hut just by sitting on it. These ecosystems are finely tuned machines. Each depends on the climate's balance of ice, sun and rain. Shift one lever, and everything can tumble, and that's exactly what's about to happen. Because beneath the calm surface of Lake Toba in Sumatra, pressure is rising, magma is swelling, gases are bubbling, and the earth itself is preparing a tantrum so large, it will nearly snuff you out. But here in 70,000 BCE, you don't know that. You are simply trying to make it through another day without starving, freezing, or getting stomped by something with tusks. The Ice Age feels eternal to you, but in truth, it is fragile. Every fire you light, every footprint you leave in the mud, is balanced on a knife edge of survival, and that knife edge is about to be shaken by the roar of a supervolcano. And as you drift closer to sleep now, imagine yourself lying on a mat of hides, the fire dying low, the stars cold above you. You pull your fur cloak tighter, hearing the breath of your companions, the faint whimper of a child, the groan of the wind against the trees. The Ice Age world presses in on you, vast, dangerous, beautiful, indifferent. You don't yet know that the true test of humanity is still coming. You don't yet know that survival will one day mean outlasting the sky itself when it goes dark for years. But for now you rest, unaware of the mountain preparing to explode. You wake up with stiff muscles, the fire having long since burned itself down to grey coals, and your first breath tastes of smoke, dust, and morning frost. The Ice Age has no mercy. Every sunrise is a reminder that survival is not a guarantee but a negotiation you strike daily with a world that doesn't care whether you make it to nightfall. Tonight's story keeps flowing. This is about where your species was scattered across the globe in 70,000 BCE, before the eruption at Toba rewrote the rules of existence. By this point in prehistory, your kind Homo sapiens has already taken its first cautious steps out of Africa, though the continent is still the beating heart of humanity. Most people live in eastern and southern Africa, where climates swing wildly, but still allow bands of humans to hunt, gather and survive. Imagine hundreds of tiny groups, maybe 30 papi here, 50 there, clinging to rivers, lakeshores or coastal edges. Each band lives and dies with limited knowledge of the others, tied together only by the faint threads of shared ancestry, and the fact that you all carry the same fragile spark of survival. In East Africa, the Great Rift Valley is one of humanity's main highways. Volcanic mountains loom above fertile valleys, rivers cut through escarpments, feeding into great lakes like Turkana and Victoria. Here people follow herds of gazelles and antelope, dig tubers with pointed sticks, and strip bark to weave shelters. You are lean, hungry, constantly moving. You know the land like the back of your calloused hand, and you've learned through generations of trial and error how to read clouds, how to track animals, how to share food when famine strikes. Southward, in the dry savannas of what is now Botswana or South Africa, humans have adapted to harsher climates. These are lands of scrub, thorn, and desert edge. Waterholes are sacred places. Families build temporary camps from branches, grasses, and animal skins, always ready to abandon them when resources run thin. Nights here are colder than bone, and predators prowl with boldness. Lions test the perimeter of your camp, hyenas laugh in the darkness, and yet humans persist, not because they are strongest, but because they are cleverest. Cooperation is your superpower. You divide tasks, you share meat, you watch each other's backs. But Africa is not the whole story. Long before 70,000 BCE, some human bands had begun to slip out of the continent, edging into the Middle East. Following the coasts of the Red Sea and the Arabian Peninsula, archaeological clues suggest that groups of Homo sapiens wandered into modern-day Israel, Jordan, and perhaps even Arabia as early as 100,000 years ago. Some of those groups vanished, crushed by climate shifts or competition. Others left faint traces, a tooth here, a few stone tools there. But around 70,000 BCE a new wave is stirring. The Levant is a land of rolling hills, caves tucked into limestone cliffs, and wild animals from gazelles to elephants. Here humans rub shoulders with Neanderthals, who are stockier, stronger and well adapted to colder climates. Further east, small trickles of humanity push into South Asia. Imagine the coasts of India, lush forests clinging to riverbanks, monsoons pounding the land, mangroves teeming with fish and shellfish. Small bands of humans, hugging the shoreline, survive by harvesting mollusks and netting fish with woven fibers. They are experimenting with a new ecological niche, marine life as a consistent food source. The ocean is vast, unpredictable, but generous enough that groups survive in places inland hunters could never reach. These migrants are pioneers, unknowingly placing themselves on the front lines of what will soon become the deadliest natural disaster in human history. If you shift your gaze north, into Central Asia, humans are far rarer. The cold here is crushing, the land brutal. Woolly mammoths trudge across icy plains, trailed by wolves with coats thick as blankets. Only the hardiest humans dare venture here. Their shelters are caves, their tools are sharp flakes of stone, and their furs are stitched crudely with bone needles. They are not yet masters of this land. They are guests, overstaying their welcome. Every fire they light feels like a borrowed warmth. Every animal's skin a stolen comfort from a world that resents their presence. Europe, by 70,000 BCE, is not yet dominated by Homo sapiens. Instead, Neanderthals hold the forests and river valleys. They know the caves of France, Spain and Germany intimately. They chip Mousterian tools from flint, hunt reindeer and bison in coordinated drives, and weather the cold with stocky bodies built for endurance. You have not yet replaced them. That battle is still in the future. For now, Europe belongs to them, and your kind is merely a rumor at its edges. Further east, in places like Siberia or Mongolia, cousins you've never met, Denisovans are carving their own story. The evidence for them is scarce: a few bones in a Siberian cave, a scattering of DNA that will one day be discovered in your own bloodlines. But they are there, living in forests of larch and pine, braving winters that would kill most of your kin. You share the world with them, though you do not know it. And then there are the lands not yet touched by human footprints. The Americas remain wild, empty of humans, brimming with megafauna that graze and roar unbothered by your kind. Giant ground sloths lumber through forests. Saber-tooths stalk bison herds. Armadillos, the size of cars, waddle across plains. In Australia, marsupial giants roam unchallenged. Diprotodons, kangaroos, taller than houses, and flightless birds that could knock you flat with one kick. These continents are ticking clocks, waiting for the first wave of humans to arrive. But in 70,000 BCE they are silent, untouched, a reminder of how small your presence still is on the planet. Your total population, if you add up every band scattered across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, is pitifully small. Estimates suggest maybe 10,000 to 20,000 breeding individuals. That's it. That's the entire species. To put that in perspective, your favorite football stadium, in the modern world, could swallow the whole of humanity at this moment and still have empty seats. You are fragile, one drought away from extinction, one epidemic away from vanishing. You don't know that, of course. You think your band is the center of the world, but history will reveal just how thin the thread of survival truly is. And migration is not just about geography, it is about risk and reward. Each new valley holds promise, but also threat. A river may be full of fish, but it may also harbor crocodiles waiting just beneath the surface. A forest may provide fruit, but it may also conceal leopards. You weigh these risks daily, without science or maps, guided only by memory, instinct, and the whispers of elders who claim to know which direction leads to safety. Spoiler: sometimes they're wrong. Technology is your lifeline. At this stage, stone tools are your bread and butter. Simple hand axes, scrapers, blades chipped from flint. You carry them in hide pouches, sharpen them at campfires, lose them in the dirt, and make new ones tomorrow. Fire is your other great tool, stolen lightning in a stick. It cooks meat, makes tubers digestible, and scares off beasts. Without it, you are just another naked ape on the savannah, soft-skinned and laughably slow. With it, you are something more, still fragile, yes, but dangerous in a way predators are beginning to respect. And yet even with these tools, your species is only just beginning to explore its potential. Language is forming, but it is not yet Shakespeare. You share meanings through clicks, grunts, gestures, and slowly evolving words. Stories are told by firelight, short, practical, mostly warnings about which places to avoid and which plants won't kill you. But the seeds of myth are there already. You shape the world in your mind, explaining lightning as the anger of unseen beings, explaining death as a journey somewhere beyond the horizon. These ideas are fragile, flickering, but they will outlive the glaciers. All of this, the scattered bands, the precarious survival, the fragile beginnings of culture, is the stage on which the Toba eruption will fall like a hammer. You are not prepared. How could you be? You worry about lions and droughts, not about skies darkening for years. But when the mountain blows, it will not care whether you are in Africa, India, or Arabia. The ash will fall, the sun will dim, the food will vanish, and the tiny threads connecting your scattered kin will fray, almost to breaking. So as you lie back in your hide shelter tonight, staring up at smoke-stained stars, remember this: your species is small, fragile, and surrounded by rivals. You are clever but not invincible. You are widespread but not secure. And just beyond the horizon, hidden under the calm waters of Lake Toba, the earth is storing a secret that will nearly erase you. You sit now on a ridge, above a lake, not knowing that thousands of kilometers away, another lake, vast, blue and deceptively calm, is building a story so catastrophic that your grandchildren's grandchildren will feel its shadow. This is the story of the Toba supervolcano itself, the geological beast stirring beneath Sumatra in 7. The earth looks still to your eyes, but it is never still. Beneath your bare feet, the crust is restless. Plates of rock the size of continents grind against each other, drift apart and collide like titans wrestling in slow motion. In Southeast Asia, where the island of Sumatra rises green and steaming from the sea, one of those tectonic battles has been brewing for millions of years. The Indo-Australian plate pushes northward, diving under the Eurasian plate, and in that grinding collision, magma finds pathways upward, pooling in chambers deep below the surface. Pressure builds, heat sears, gases bubble like soda shaken too long. Lake Toba sits quietly atop this pressure cooker. Today you would see a placid expanse of water framed by hills and forest, but in 70,000 BCE the volcano was preparing for a tantrum unlike anything in human memory. Geologists, looking back, estimate that the magma chamber beneath Toba stretched for tens of kilometers, filled with molten rock, rich in silica, a recipe for disaster. The more silica in magma, the stickier it is, and the stickier it is, the more pressure it can trap. It's like bottling thunder. Imagine steam trapped in a kettle, except the kettle is miles wide and the lid is the crust of the earth itself. At first, gases bubble and seep, venting through fumaroles, little holes where sulfur hisses out. Earthquakes rattle the land, small at first, then sharper as the chamber swells. Forests tremble, animals scatter. If you were living in Sumatra then, you'd hear deep rumbles from the ground, feel tremors in your chest, as though the earth had a heartbeat. You wouldn't know the science, but you'd sense danger, a looming threat in the air thick with sulfur's stench. The signs were there, the warnings written in the land. Small eruptions may have preceded the big one, spurts of ash, fountains of lava, local disasters that killed forests and villages of animals, but left the larger world untouched. To the people nearby, these must have felt apocalyptic enough. You would see black columns twisting into the sky, forests catching fire, rivers boiling with falling ash, birds would vanish, sunsets would glow a poisoned red, but the true eruption was still waiting, pressure cooking under the crust, building in silence. Geologists estimate that when the chamber finally gave way, it released 2,800 cubic kilometers of magma. Let that sink in. Imagine the Grand Canyon. Now imagine filling it with molten rock and ash, not once, but multiple times. That's the scale. It is one of the largest eruptions in the last 2 million years, a true supervolcano, the kind of event that reshapes not just a landscape but an entire planet. The explosion would begin with earthquakes tearing the land apart, a cracking roar that split valleys and dropped hillsides into chasms. Then the eruption, a blast so loud, so violent, it would echo across oceans. Columns of ash and gas surged upward, piercing the stratosphere, climbing maybe 40 kilometers high. Lightning crackled through the cloud, igniting storms of fire, and glass shards, The plume turned day into night for hundreds of miles around. If you were anywhere near, you would not live long enough to process it. The air itself would burn your lungs. Closer still, pyroclastic flows, avalanches of superheated ash, rock and gas, raced down the volcano's slopes at hurricane speed, hotter than molten steel. Forests vaporized, rivers boiled dry. Anything living, from elephants to tiny insects, was erased in seconds. These flows carved the land into moonscape, leaving nothing but smoldering ash where jungles once stood. And then came the ashfall. Fine particles drifted across thousands of kilometers, carried by winds into India, Africa, and beyond. In some places, ash piled meters thick, choking rivers, smothering plants, and collapsing shelters. In other places, a gray dust settled like snow, covering leaves, clogging lungs, turning water sour. For months the sky wept ash, a slow rain of death from a volcano most people had never seen. But the real killer wasn't just the immediate blast, it was the gases: sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, fluorine. The eruption injected vast quantities into the stratosphere, where they spread around the globe, forming aerosols that reflected sunlight back into space. Within weeks, the planet began to cool. Within months, it shivered. Crops failed. Though crops is generous, back then it meant wild grains and roots that no longer sprouted. Animals died off in swaths, starved by failing ecosystems. And humans, fragile and few, suddenly faced a new enemy, a volcanic winter. To you, crouching by your fire thousands of miles away, the first signs would be subtle. The sun, once golden, now looked dimmer, a weak disk behind a haze of gray. Days felt shorter, nights colder, rain patterns changed, the familiar rhythm of wet and dry seasons faltered. Plants you relied on grew sparse, herds of animals you hunted thinned or migrated elsewhere. You didn't know about aerosols or climate forcing, but you knew something had shifted. The world itself felt sick. Modern scientists debate how severe this cooling was. Some estimate global temperatures dropped by 3°C for years, maybe even decades. That might sound small, but it's catastrophic. A few degrees is the difference between ice sheets advancing or retreating, between rain falling or failing. To small bands of humans clinging to survival, it meant starvation, migration, and death. And yet, the eruption wasn't just destruction, it remade the land. When the magma chamber emptied, the ground above collapsed, forming a caldera more than 100 kilometers long. Over time, this caldera filled with water, creating the Lake Toba you know today. In that lake's mirror surface, the story of apocalypse is written, though most who gaze at it now have no idea. The explosion erased entire ecosystems, yet in its wake, new ones would slowly, painfully emerge. Volcanic soil is rich, after all, though you'd have to wait centuries to benefit. Think for a moment about the sheer scale of what we're talking about. Mount St. Helens in 1980, tiny. Krakatoa in 1883, a footnote compared to Toba. Even Tambora in 1815, which gave us the famous year without a summer and famines worldwide, was only a tenth the size. Toba was not a disaster, it was the disaster, and it happened precisely when humanity was weakest, smallest, most vulnerable. And yet, somehow your kind endured. That's the part that should keep you awake tonight, not in fear but in awe, against a world-shaking blast, against skies choked with ash, against years of hunger and cold. A few thousand humans clung to life. Your ancestors lit fires, huddled in caves, shared scraps of meat and whispered stories through long nights. They endured not because they had certainty, but because they refused to stop trying. As you drift towards sleep now, imagine you are one of them. You don't know the word supervolcano, you don't know you're living through one of Earth's greatest cataclysms. All you know is that the nights are colder, the food scarcer, and the world stranger than it used to be. You stare at the dim sun through a haze of ash and wonder if it will ever shine again, and somehow, through instinct, will, and luck, you decide to keep going. The earth has convulsed, the mountain has blown, and humanity has just entered its darkest winter. The mountain has erupted, the sky has gone black, and the land is shuddering under the weight of fire and ash. Tonight, you keep moving through this unfolding catastrophe, and our focus turns now to the signs and omens that warned of the coming disaster. The tremors, the fumes, the uneasy animals, the small eruptions before the big one. You've grown used to the ground beneath you being firm, dependable, something you can trust, but in Sumatra around 70,000 BCE, the earth itself was restless. To the people living in its shadow, The first warning signs were not written in textbooks, but felt in their bones. Tremors rattled huts, sent birds screaming into the air, and made rivers slosh against their banks like overturned bowls. Small quakes came often, rumbling low and deep, sometimes sharp enough to split rock. You don't need to understand tectonics to know that when the ground itself writhes, something enormous is stirring below. And then there were the fumes. Sulfur seeped up from cracks in the soil, sharp and acrid, burning throats and eyes. Pools bubbled where no heat should be. Springs turned cloudy and hot, steam rising, even in the cool night. The water tasted wrong, metallic, bitter, and animals refused to drink. If you were a hunter following a deer to a stream, you might see it stop short, paw nervously, then turn away as though it sensed what you could not. Smaller eruptions, precursors, may have torn through the surface. Imagine living in a dense forest, when suddenly a column of ash punches into the sky, darkening noon into twilight. Lava fountains spray upward, setting trees ablaze, sending animals stampeding in blind panic. For the local bands of humans, perhaps dozens, perhaps hundreds spread across valleys, each of these outbursts was terrifying, but survivable. They would retreat, wait, and then creep back when the land quieted. But each smaller eruption was merely a prelude, a clearing of the throat before the scream. Animals felt it first. Herds became restless, their migration routes strange and erratic. Elephants bellowed nervously, sometimes refusing to leave valleys they had grazed in for centuries. Birds swarmed away from cliffs, abandoning nests. Dogs, or rather their wild, wolf-like ancestors, barked at nothing, whining into the ground itself. If you were observant, you'd notice patterns: the silence of frogs before a tremor, the sudden absence of fish in a lake that used to teem with life. The ecosystem itself was holding its breath. Even the air changed. Dust hung constantly. Fine particles carried on every breeze. The sunsets grew blood red, the moon blurred by haze. Days felt shorter, shadows sharper, and the sky held a strange heaviness that pressed on your chest. Some may have thought the gods were angry, though gods at this stage of history were not yet fully formed concepts. More likely, they saw spirits in the smoke, ancestors in the quakes, omens in the way the sun dimmed and glowed. Whatever the interpretation, fear grew. The land itself bore scars. Cracks opened, long and jagged, swallowing roots and splitting streams. Lakes frothed with gas bubbles, belching carbon dioxide and methane, sometimes suffocating fish by the thousands. Forests near the vents browned and withered, poisoned by unseen fumes. Even insects died off in patches, leaving eerie silences in places usually humming with life. To a modern geologist, these were obvious danger signs. To a forager in 70,000 BCE, they were uncanny shifts in a world that usually behaved with some regularity. And still, life tried to continue. Hunters tracked animals, gatherers dug tubers, children played by rivers, fires were lit, shelters patched, songs mumbled to soothe restless nights. Humans are stubborn, even in the shadow of danger. Routine is clung to. After all, you've endured droughts, floods, predators and storms. Why should this be different? But deep down you'd feel it, an unease that wouldn't leave, a tension like a taut string humming underfoot. Something enormous was coming, and no one could stop it. The final weeks before the eruption must have been chaos. Tremors strong enough to topple trees, roars from beneath the earth that shook the air like thunder, sulphurous stench so thick you couldn't breathe without coughing, animals fleeing en masse, a sight that should have been enough to send people running too. And yet, where could they run? The eruption's reach would be global. Even those far away in India, Africa and beyond would feel the consequences. And then, without further warning, the mountains split open. Pressure that had been building for centuries was released in one colossal blast, a noise louder than any thunder, any storm, any cry the earth had ever given. In that instant, all the omens proved true, and all the warnings were fulfilled. The people who had felt the tremors, who had smelled the sulfur, who had seen the red sunsets, they were the first to be erased, consumed by the very ground they walked on. The signs had been there all along. Humanity noticed them, feared them, even respected them, but lacked the knowledge to act. You couldn't predict, couldn't measure, couldn't model. All you could do was hope the earth calmed down again. This time it didn't, and the world would never be the same. The omens have ended, the tremors have built to a breaking point, and then without mercy the mountain tore itself apart. Tonight you step straight into the heart of the colossal eruption of Toba itself, the moment when the earth let loose one of the most violent outbursts in all of human prehistory. The ground did not simply shake, it convulsed. Imagine standing near the shore of Sumatra's vast lake in 70,000 BCE, when the crust suddenly ripped open. At first, it might have sounded like distant thunder, rolling endlessly, growing louder, closer, sharper, until it was no longer sound, but a physical force hammering your chest. Trees toppled before your eyes, rocks split like firewood, the earth itself heaved, and then an explosion so loud that it seemed silence followed, as though the world was stunned by its own voice. The plume rose instantly, a column of ash, gas and pulverized rock blasted upward at hundreds of meters per second, piercing the stratosphere, clawing higher and higher until it towered more than 40 kilometers into the sky. The darkness it created wasn't gradual, it was sudden, suffocating, complete. Day turned to midnight in the span of minutes. Lighting ripped across the mushrooming column, white and violent, igniting forests already scorched by the rain of fire. Closer to the caldera, death arrived, not in hours but in seconds. Pyroclastic flows, searing avalanches of ash, gas and shattered stone, surged outward at hurricane speeds. Hotter than molten steel, they incinerated everything in their path. Forests vanished in a hiss of steam, rivers boiled away into clouds. Herds of elephants and rhinos crumpled instantly, their bodies carbonized before they even hit the ground. For humans caught nearby, there was no escape. One moment, you were running, breath ragged, the next you were ash swirling in the storm. The scale of destruction is almost impossible to imagine. Modern scientists estimate 2,800 cubic kilometers of material were expelled in the eruption. To put that in perspective, Mount St. Helens in 1980 produced less than 1 cubic kilometer. Krakatoa in 1883, which terrified the world, was tiny by comparison. Tambora in 1815, famous for the year without a summer, was barely a tenth of Toba's output. This was not just a volcanic eruption, it was a planetary event. Ash spread in waves. In Sumatra and across much of Southeast Asia, it fell in layers tens of meters thick, burying valleys, collapsing forests, suffocating lakes. In India, thousands of kilometers away, deposits still measure up to 15 centimeters thick. That means clouds of ash blotted out the sun, drifted over mountains, and rained down on lands thousands of miles from the source. For weeks, the air was heavy with choking dust. You couldn't drink from rivers without gagging, you couldn't breathe without coughing. Water turned acidic, plants withered beneath a gray snow that poisoned their leaves and blocked out light. And then came the fire. As the eruption raged, forests ignited, entire landscapes burning in infernos that joined into one endless blaze. Smoke joined ash, thickening the sky. Lightning storms sparked across the clouds, bolts striking into seas already boiling with falling debris. It was chaos upon chaos. Fire, ash, storm, quake, flood. The world was unmade in layers. The people closest to Toba had no chance. Whole bands of humans, families, children, elders, were annihilated. Their shelters, tools and stories vanished in the flood of fire and stone. The land they once hunted was turned into wasteland, scorched and poisoned. But even those far away could not escape the fallout. Ash dimmed the sun as far as Africa. Temperatures plummeted. The eruption lasted for weeks, its effects for years. Think of the sheer terror of watching this unfold as an eyewitness. You wake to trembling earth. The sky darkens as if the night has returned. The air grows hot, unbreathable. You stumble, cough, shield your eyes as ash pelts down like rain. You look up, and the sun is gone, replaced by a roiling black canopy streaked with fire. You hear not birds, not animals, but the roar of the earth itself, a sound so constant it swallows your thoughts. You try to run, but the air itself burns, and the world beneath your feet slides like liquid. For you it ends quickly. For your species, the nightmare is only beginning. Because this eruption was not content with local destruction, it was vast enough to trigger a volcanic winter. Sulfur dioxide injected into the stratosphere spread across the globe, reflecting sunlight away. Temperatures fell by as much as 3. That may sound minor to you today, but in the fragile balance of ice age ecosystems, it was devastation. Glaciers advanced. Rain patterns collapsed, grasslands died, forests withered, herds vanished, and with them, so did much of humanity's food. What happened in Sumatra was immediate and fiery. What followed worldwide was slow and suffocating. Crops never sprouted, rivers froze earlier, thawed later, rain came at the wrong times, or not at all. Hunters returned from the plains empty-handed, gatherers dug up roots only to find them shriveled. Hunger stalked every campfire. For years, perhaps decades, The shadow of Toba lingered in the skies, dimming, chilling, starving the world. It's no wonder scientists believe the eruption may have reduced humanity to a bottleneck of just a few thousand breeding individuals. You, and everyone you know, would have felt it in your bones. The nights colder, the bellies emptier, the fires smaller. The comfort of routine hunting, gathering, telling stories would be replaced by constant uncertainty. Would the next sunrise bring warmth, or another day of grey twilight? And yet there's a detail worth holding on to. Even amid the eruption's violence, life clung stubbornly to the edges. Ash falls smother, but they also fertilize. After years, forests regrow in volcanic soil richer than before. Animals repopulate, lakes refill. Life is tenacious, and so is humanity. While countless lives were lost, while entire regions were erased, some survived, on the African coasts, in sheltered valleys, by rivers not entirely poisoned. Scattered groups endured the long dark. As you drift to sleep imagining this eruption, think of the paradox, the Earth destroying on a scale you can barely comprehend, and yet humanity, fragile and small, refusing to vanish. Your ancestors faced skies turned black, lands turned barren, seas turned bitter, and still somehow they made it through. You are proof of their persistence, their stubborn refusal to be erased by a mountain's wrath. The colossal eruption was not just a chapter in Earth's story, it was a test, and against the odds, humanity passed, not with glory, not with triumph, but simply with survival, and sometimes that is more than enough. The eruption has shattered the land, buried the forests, and darkened the sky, but the fury of Toba did not stop with fire and thunder. Tonight we move deeper into its aftermath, how ash and pyroclastic flows spread across continents, reshaping rivers, soil, animals and human lives in ways that felt apocalyptic to those still breathing. If you could stand above Sumatra in those first days, hovering like a ghost untouchable by heat or smoke, you would see devastation on a scale no human eye had ever witnessed. The volcano's peak was gone, swallowed into a crater more than 100 kilometers wide. Where mountains had stood, there was now a yawning scar glowing at its edges, still belching smoke into a choked sky. Around it, the land was no longer land. Rivers had boiled into steam, their beds clogged with blackened stones. Forests had been flattened and burned, not tree stumps but ash shadows, where trunks had vaporized, leaving only impressions in gray. From this caldera, pyroclastic flows radiated outward in all directions. These were not just clouds of ash, the way you might picture from a small eruption. These were tidal waves of destruction, hot enough to melt stone, dense enough to bury valleys in seconds. They rolled for hundreds of kilometers, carving through jungle, flattening everything in their path. Imagine a hurricane, but made of molten rock and glass shards, roaring faster than a galloping horse, hotter than the inside of a forge. Anything alive within reach, deer, tigers, humans, had no chance. They were swept up, consumed, obliterated. And beyond the reach of these flows came the ash. Fine, deadly dust rained down for weeks, drifting on winds that carried it across oceans. In India, more than 3,000 kilometers away, layers of ash, 15 centimeters thick, settled into soil and rivers. Archaeologists still find it today, a ghostly reminder of skies that once snowed poison. In Africa, thousands of kilometers further still, a gray veil dimmed the sun, coating leaves, choking streams, stinging the lungs of people who had never even heard of Sumatra. You, sitting in your camp in East Africa, would not know the name of the mountain, but you would curse its ash as it covered your world. The ash killed indirectly, but thoroughly. Plants suffocated beneath its weight, their leaves unable to drink in sunlight, grasses withered in gray blankets. Tubers rotted underground as soils turned acidic. Rivers grew shallow, clogged with silt, fish gasping for oxygen. Herds of animals, gazelles, mammoths, elephants, wandered farther and farther for food, only to collapse when their stomachs filled with grit, instead of grass. Birds fell from the sky, their feathers coated in dust. Insects perished in clouds, leaving forests strangely silent. For humans, survival was suddenly a daily gamble. Your food vanished, the berries you gathered tasted bitter, dusted with poison. The animals you hunted grew scarce, either dead or gone, migrating into territories you couldn't reach. Even water was dangerous. Rivers slick with ash scalded your throat, lakes turned cloudy, streams clogged with dead fish. Your lungs burned when you breathed. Children coughed until they could not sleep. Ash fell constantly, settling into hair, eyes, fire pits, bedding. No matter how much you swept, your shelter was never clean. It was as though the world had turned against you personally. But the ash did more than choke life, it also reshaped the land permanently. Where it fell thick, new soil layers were laid down, rich in minerals but deadly in the short term. Rivers shifted course, their banks collapsing under the weight. Wetlands filled with sludge, drowning groves that had stood for centuries. On coastlines, tsunamis triggered by the eruption washed ash back into the sea, poisoning coral reefs, suffocating shellfish. The destruction was not a single moment, it unfolded in waves, months turning to years of fallout. And what of the skies? The ash cloud was no gentle veil, it was a roiling, storm-ridden canopy that encircled the planet. Lightning crackled endlessly within it, illuminating nights that never truly darkened, days that never truly brightened. The sun became a faint disk, weak, smothered, even the moon was blurred, a smudge behind veils of drifting particles. For children growing up in those years, the memory of a bright golden sky might have felt like myth. Their world was grey, dim, oppressive. The psychological toll must have been immense. Imagine sitting with your band around a fire, staring at a sun that barely glows, wondering if it will ever return. You don't have astronomy or geology, you have only your senses, and they tell you the world is ending. Perhaps you invent stories to explain it, spirits punishing you, ancestors angry, the sky stolen by unseen enemies. Fear creeps into every word, every ritual. Hope becomes as fragile as the embers of your dwindling firewood. And still, even amid ash, people tried to live. You would keep hunting, following trails of starving animals. You would keep gathering, brushing dust from plants in desperate hope they were edible. You would keep lighting fires though even dry wood smoked thick in the heavy air. Every day became improvisation, boiling water longer to make it safe, drying meat faster before it spoiled, covering children's faces with hides to protect them from the dust. These tiny acts of stubbornness are the reason your species survived at all. The ash also linked you unknowingly to people thousands of kilometers away, a band in Africa, inhaling grit, a band in India scraping soot from their shelters, a band in Arabia struggling to find game. They were all living the same nightmare though none knew of the others. Humanity, scattered and fragile, was united in suffering, bound by the grey snow falling from the same poisoned sky. Over time, weeks turned into months, months into years. The ash storm slowed, but the damage remained. Crops of wild grain failed, herds dwindled, forests that once fed you were dead expanses of skeletal trunks. The earth was quiet, too quiet, no birds, no buzzing insects, only the hiss of wind through dead grass. In your bones, you felt the change. This was no season, no passing drought, this was something deeper, something permanent. And yet, through it all, some survived. Perhaps your ancestors huddled near coasts, where the sea still offered fish and shellfish, less poisoned than the land. Perhaps they found valleys where ash was thinner, rivers still flowing clear enough to drink. Perhaps they simply endured, scraping through each day with no plan but persistence. However it happened, enough of them lived for you to be here now, imagining their struggle. The ash and pyroclastic flows nearly ended humanity, but they also set the stage for resilience. When the skies cleared decades later, when forests began to regrow, when animals returned, the survivors carried scars but also knowledge. They knew the world could turn hostile overnight. They knew survival meant cooperation, adaptability, creativity. They knew above all that persistence could outlast even the fury of a supervolcano. As you let your eyes close now, imagine yourself lying in a shelter, dusted with ash, breathing shallowly to keep the grit from your lungs. Outside, the world is silent, grey, alien, but inside, someone hums softly, a fragment of a song, a reminder that you are still here. The ash falls, the earth trembles, but the flame of humanity flickers on. The ash has settled thick, forests lie flattened, and rivers run foul. But the disaster does not end when the sky goes dark. It deepens as the environment itself collapses in the eruption's immediate aftermath. Tonight you step further into the wreckage of Earth, in the years right after Toba's fury. The eruption itself was fast, violent, over in weeks, but its effects lingered, a slow unspooling of chaos across landscapes that once pulsed with life. Imagine you are standing in a valley, months after the final rumble has quieted. The silence is unbearable. Where birds once shrieked and monkeys chattered, there is nothing. Where grasses once rustled with herds, only dust lies heavy, grey and still. Even the air feels strange, thinner somehow, as if the atmosphere itself is exhausted. Animals were among the first casualties. In the blast zone, every living creature was erased outright. Further afield, starvation claimed them in waves. Herbivores had nothing left to graze, leaves smothered, grasses buried, seeds killed before sprouting. A gazelle can survive many dangers, lions, droughts, broken legs, but it cannot survive months without food. Herds collapsed, bones littered plains in eerie silence. For predators the effect was delayed but just as brutal. Lions prowled the empty savanna, ribs showing through their skins, hunting desperately but finding only corpses too foul to eat. Wolves, hyenas, saber-tooths, all stalked in vain. When the herbivores starved, the carnivores soon followed. Rivers, once lifelines, turned treacherous. Ash clogged their beds, thickening them into slurries of grey sludge. Fish suffocated, their gills packed with silt. Crocodiles, once lords of the waterways, died en masse as the water grew too acidic. Lakes shrank, poisoned from above by constant ashfall. Even the ocean felt the wound. Near coasts, reefs whitened, coral choking on ash that drifted out to sea. Shellfish populations dropped, their delicate systems overwhelmed by the toxins. For humans living near shores, the sea had been a refuge, but even it now faltered. Forests fared no better. Trees could not photosynthesize under skies dimmed for months. Ash piled onto their branches, snapping them under weight. Seeds, usually so resilient, failed to germinate in poisoned soils. Imagine walking through a rainforest in India and finding it eerily skeletal, bare trunks reaching upward off blackened fingers, no canopy, no chatter of birds, only grey dust settling endlessly. The air itself betrayed you. Breathing became labor. Ash particles lodged in lungs, scratching, inflaming, infecting. Children coughed themselves hoarse. Elders wheezed. Fires, once humanity's ally, now betrayed it too. Every flame produced thick smoke that lingered in heavy skies, choking even those who huddled close to it for warmth. You needed fire to survive, but each spark reminded you that breathing was now dangerous. And the climate? The true catastrophe came in the cooling. With sulfur dioxide high in the stratosphere, sunlight bounced back into space, leaving the earth shivering. In tropical regions, where warmth had always been a guarantee, frosts began to bite. Crops of wild millet and sorghum failed to appear. Fruits that normally hung heavy on branches shriveled before ripening. Nights lengthened in the imagination. Dawns felt slow, reluctant, as if the sun had grown tired. In higher latitudes, the effect was harsher still. The great ice sheets of Eurasia and North America advanced. Glaciers that had once crept now surged forward, swallowing valleys, grinding forests beneath miles of ice. Rivers froze solid, snow fell, and refused to melt. Year after year, for Neanderthals in Europe, already struggling with cold, the added chill must have been devastating. Their world shrank to caves and desperate hunts across frozen plains. For Denisovans in Asia, the forests they relied on withered, forcing them to adapt or fade. Humanity, scattered and fragile, felt the squeeze everywhere. In Africa, the cradle of your species, rains failed. The monsoons, driven by heat contrasts, weakened under the global chill. Savannas turned brown, lakes receded. Famine clawed at every band of people. Mothers gave birth to infants too weak to thrive. Hunters returned with empty hands. For weeks at a time, camps might go without meat, surviving only on bitter roots or insects. Some groups starved outright, leaving behind only footprints in ash and bones, gnawed clean by scavengers. And yet even in collapse, there were strange survivors. Some plants adapted, sprouting through thin ash layers. Some animals shifted diets. Omnivores like pigs, rats, and jackals found ways to scavenge what others left. Humans too began improvising in ways they had never needed before. They cracked open bones to suck marrow, ground seeds into paste when meat failed, dug deeper for roots. Hunger sharpened ingenuity. Still, the sense of apocalypse hung everywhere. Nights were darker than memory, stars obscured by haze. Days were colder, wind sharper. Every cough was a reminder that the air itself was poisoned. Every empty belly was a reminder that the earth had betrayed you. To live through those years was to feel as though the world had ended and you were lingering in its ruins. But what makes this moment so pivotal is that, against all odds, some humans endured it, in small refugees, valleys, shielded from ash, coasts where fish still swam, pockets of land where rain still came. Bands of people scraped through. They huddled together for warmth, shared every scrap of food, whispered encouragement against despair. They learned painfully that survival meant not strength alone, but cooperation, imagination, and sheer stubbornness. So when you think of the collapse of ecosystems after Toba, don't just picture death, picture resilience, a mother chewing bitter seeds to soften them for her child, a hunter stalking a single weakened antelope for days until it finally falls, a fire kept alive with the last dry twigs in a grey, wet forest. Picture humanity refusing to vanish, even when the world itself seemed determined to erase it. And as you close your eyes tonight, imagine that silence, the forests gone quiet, the rivers sluggish, the air thick with ash. You are there in a world half dead, half alive, and yet somehow the heartbeat of your species continues. The forests have withered, the rivers choke with silt, and the animals lie silent in grey fields of ash. Yet the catastrophe did not end with the eruption itself, or even with the poisoned ecosystems. The true terror came after, when the skies themselves turned against you. Tonight you step into the global ash fallout and atmospheric chaos that followed Toba, reaching far beyond Sumatra to touch every corner of the earth. At first, the ash seemed like a local horror. It buried valleys near Sumatra, darkened the forests of Southeast Asia, and drifted west into India in layers thick enough to still be found today. But then winds carried it farther. The jet streams, those high-altitude rivers of air, spread fine volcanic particles around the globe, dispersing them like invisible knives across continents. Within weeks, dust from Toba coated skies from Africa to Australia. Imagine standing in East Africa, thousands of kilometers away, and noticing that the sunrise you counted on to mark the rhythm of life no longer looks like sunrise. The disk of the sun is weak, dim, blurred by haze. You squint and see not golden light but a sickly whitish glow. Shadows disappear, days blur into dusky twilight. It is neither truly day nor night, but a strange in-between that unsettles the mind. The fallout was more than just darkness. Sulfur dioxide injected into the stratosphere formed reflective aerosols, a mirror-like shield that bounced sunlight back into space. Scientists today estimate global temperatures dropped by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, a staggering shift in climate terms. For you huddling in a shelter of hides and branches, that drop meant nights so cold your breath froze on your lips, mornings where frost glittered on grasslands that had never known frost before. In tropical zones, crops of wild millet and yams shriveled. In temperate zones, winters deepened, summers weakened. And the rain, oh, the rain turned strange. Ash particles seeded the clouds, warping rainfall into violent bursts, followed by long droughts. Rivers flooded, then dried. Monsoons that had once been lifelines for South Asia faltered. Africa's dependable wet seasons collapsed into erratic trickles. You, watching the sky for signs of relief, learned to mistrust the clouds. When rain did come, it carried acid, burning plants, stinging skin, souring lakes. Drinking water became a gamble. Every sip could be relief or poison. For months, ash continued to fall in waves, sometimes thick and clumpy, sometimes as fine as mist. Imagine waking each morning to sweep grey dust from your bedding, your tools, your children's hair. Imagine cooking over a fire and tasting grit in every bite. Even your skin was never clean. Ash clung to sweat, turning bodies into pale, ghost-like forms. The smell of sulfur became constant, a reminder that the eruption was not over, even if the mountain had gone quiet. The fallout also carried silence. In forests, birds vanished. Their songs, once marking dawn and dusk, were replaced by nothing but wind, hissing through skeletal trees. In grasslands, the buzz of insects disappeared. Entire soundscapes collapsed, leaving behind an eerie hush that made every cough, every cry of a hungry child echo too loudly. For early humans, who navigated their world as much by sound as by sight, this silence was unnerving, unnatural, almost supernatural. Animals reacted first. Herds migrated desperately, following scents of greener lands that no longer existed. Mammoths trudged farther north, only to find icy plains barren. Antelope herds scattered, weakened, easy prey when they could be found. Carnivores prowled aimlessly, attacking humans more often as their usual prey starved. Even insects tried to adapt, swarming on the few green plants that remained, leaving little for humans to gather. And yet the fallout was not just physical, it was psychological. Imagine being a young child born during those years, never having seen a bright sun, never knowing a blue sky. To you the dim grey glow is normal, the ash-scented wind, ordinary. The world has always been cold, food scarce, days colourless. For elders, the memory of a brighter world lingers like a cruel ghost. They tell stories of times when the sun was warm, when forests sang with birds, when rivers ran clear. But to you these are myths, fairy tales of a golden age that feels impossible. The fallout created a world where survival meant adaptation, and quickly, bands of humans who relied heavily on hunting large animals began to starve as herds disappeared. Those who turned to fishing, shellfish, or plants fared slightly better. Coastal groups may have had an edge, scavenging the sea even as land resources failed. Inland groups, cut off from such lifelines, dwindled. Entire lineages may have vanished, erased not by predators but by grey dust and dim skies. And it wasn't only humans. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, even species of giant animals, all felt the pinch. For many megafauna, the combination of sudden cold and starving ecosystems was catastrophic. Species began their long decline, setting the stage for extinctions in the millennia to come. The fallout wasn't just an event, it was a turning point in Earth's ecological balance. Over years, the ash finally settled. The skies began to clear, though not fully. The aerosols lingered, keeping temperatures low. When at last the sun returned brighter, the world it illuminated was scarred. Forests were thinned, rivers rerouted, animal populations fractured. Humans once scattered across wider ranges, now clustered in smaller, more habitable refuges. Population numbers plummeted, possibly to as few as a few thousand breeding individuals. The bottleneck was real, the threat of extinction closer than ever. And yet, through this fallout, resilience hardened. You, crouched by a smoky fire, coughing through dust, learned endurance. You learned to share food more carefully, to innovate tools when old ones broke, to adapt diets to whatever scraps the land still offered. You learned to wait, to trust that the dim sun might one day shine again, and that patience, that refusal to vanish in the fallout, became the foundation for all that followed. So as you rest tonight, imagine the ash still drifting, settling into every crack, every breath, every dream. Imagine the world hushed and dim, and humanity clinging on in tiny bands, ghosts moving through a grey earth. It was not the end of the world, but it came close enough that survival itself felt like defiance. The ash has fallen, the rivers have clogged, the animals have died, and the skies hang heavy. But now comes the part that truly tested humanity's endurance, the volcanic winter that followed, when the eruption of Toba warped the climate across the globe, plunging the world into years of cold, hunger, and despair. You have grown used to hardship. Droughts come, then rains return. Predators take some of your people, but children are born again. Seasons shift, but eventually, balance is restored. That rhythm had always been the unwritten promise of nature. It punishes, then it heals. But after Toba, that promise broke. The volcanic winter was not a season, it was a sentence. Imagine waking one morning in Africa, thousands of kilometers from Sumatra, expecting dawn warmth on your skin. Instead, the air is chill, the ground stiff with frost. You rub your hands together, blow on your fingers, but the cold clings stubbornly. The sun, when it finally crawls above the horizon, looks weak, as though smothered by smoke. That day never grows hot, nor does the next, nor the next. Slowly you realize the warmth you counted on has fled. The drop in temperature was not a single sharp plunge, it was a grinding, relentless cooling that reshaped entire ecosystems. Scientists estimate that after Toba, global temperatures fell by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius for years, maybe even decades. In some regions, the fall was even steeper, and 3 to 5 degrees doesn't sound like much until you live it. It meant rainforests shrinking, deserts spreading, glaciers advancing. It meant rivers freezing, lakes shrinking, and monsoons failing. In the tropics, where you and most of your kin lived, that cooling struck like betrayal. Savannas browned, grasses withered, and the herds you relied on grew thin, then vanished. Fruit trees bore little or nothing. Tubers that once grew fat underground shriveled into uselessness. Hunters returned from expeditions empty-handed, not for days, but for moons at a time. And hunger was everywhere. You felt it gnawing at your belly day after day. Children's cries at night grew weaker, then fell silent. Mothers starved themselves so their little ones could have another bite. Elders refused portions, choosing death to give others a chance. Bands shrank. Some people wandered off, hoping to find better lands, and never returned. The smell of death lingered on the air, not sudden, violent death, but the slow wasting away of bodies with nothing left to burn inside. Water, too, betrayed you. Ash from the eruption poisoned lakes and rivers, and the cold meant less rainfall to replenish what you had. Springs dried or turned bitter. You learned to ration, to sip carefully, to dig deep for moisture. Coastal people fared slightly better, turning to the sea. Shellfish, seaweed, and fish became lifelines, though even those resources strained under the global chill. When sea levels dropped from advancing ice sheets, shorelines shifted, exposing some coasts but swallowing others. You chased the retreating tide for survival. Animals adapted as best they could. Mammoths and woolly rhinos thrived in new cold expanses but found their ranges disrupted. Reindeer and elk spread south, chased by advancing ice, but in many regions, extinction stalked silently. Megafauna populations dipped, never to recover fully. Predators became desperate, raiding human camps more often, dragging away the weak. To sit by a fire in the volcanic winter was to be both frozen and hunted, a double peril that wore you thin. The psychological toll was heavier still. For generations, humans had trusted the cycles of seasons. Now nothing made sense. The sun felt broken, the rain unreliable, the land cursed. Myths grew to explain it. Some said spirits had stolen the sun. Others believed ancestors were punishing the living. Rituals sprang up, fires built higher, offerings laid in rivers, chants whispered under starless skies. Faith became as important as food, not because it changed the world, but because it gave reason to keep walking through it. And yet even in this volcanic winter life found cracks to endure. Humans learned to innovate. You discovered new foods, grubs beneath bark, roots you had once ignored. Shellfish pried stubbornly from rocks. You learned to store what little you had, to dry meat over fires, to dig pits and line them with ash to preserve tubers. Cooperation deepened. Bands that once might have split from conflict now clung together, sharing scraps, pooling knowledge. Survival became less about the strong, and more about the cooperative. This winter was not uniform everywhere. Some refugees remained. Along certain African coasts, ocean currents softened the chill, allowing shellfish and fish to remain abundant. In sheltered valleys, microclimates resisted the harshest cold, giving space for plants to cling on. Those places became cradles of survival. If your ancestors were lucky enough to be in such refuges, you lived. If not, your line ended there, erased quietly in the long dark. The volcanic winter also changed migration. Starving bands moved, seeking food, water, warmth. Some returned southward into safer zones, others pressed north or east, stumbling into lands once too harsh but now strangely open. Paths were forged not by choice but by desperation, and those paths later shaped the spread of humanity across the globe. Through it all, the sense of waiting haunted you, waiting for the sun to grow strong again, waiting for the rains to return, waiting for green to push through gray. Some winters passed, some summers offered flickers of warmth, but the memory of hunger remained, carved into bone and blood. Generations later, even when skies cleared, the lessons lingered. Never trust abundance, always prepare for scarcity, never forget that the world itself can betray you overnight. So as you lie back tonight, imagine yourself huddled in that winter world, a thin fur cloak around your shoulders, embers flickering weakly at your feet. Outside, the ground crunches with frost, the wind cuts sharp, carrying the smell of ash even years later. You breathe shallowly, conserving warmth, conserving hope. Around you, your people whisper stories, not of triumph, but of endurance. And though the volcanic winter feels endless, though hunger claws, though death waits, still you remain. Because that is what humanity did in the shadow of Toba, endured, not gloriously, not easily, but stubbornly, bone-thin and ash-choked, carrying forward the fragile flame of survival into a world determined to snuff it out. The sun is dim, the earth is cold, and food is vanishing. But the story of Toba is not only about landscapes and skies, it is also about people. Tonight you step into the heart of survival itself, how small bands of humans faced starvation, migration, and near extinction, as the volcanic winter dragged on. Imagine yourself waking in a shelter of hides, your body stiff with hunger. The fire you kept through the night has gone out, and relighting it is a struggle because the wood you gathered is damp with ash. You chew a scrap of dried root, fibrous, bitter, offering almost no relief, and look at your companions, hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, children whose bellies are distended not from abundance but from hunger. This is your world. After Toba, every day begins with the same question: will we eat today, or will today be the last? Hunger is not just emptiness in your belly, it is a slow thief that steals strength, clarity, and will. Hunters rise in the morning with spears in hand but walk unsteadily, weaker each day. They track animal prints across ash-coated ground, often following for days, only to find the herd already dead or gone. Even when an antelope or boar is caught, the meat is thin, the animal itself half-starved. It barely feeds the camp for more than a night. Gatherers fare little better. Fruits are rare, often shriveled. Tubers are small, stunted by poisoned soils. Nuts are fewer, harder to find. Some plants that once nourished now make you sick, altered by the acidic rains. Each mouthful is a gamble, food or poison, relief or another night of cramps and vomiting. Children are the first to fade. Their smaller bodies cannot endure long fasts. Mothers nurse until their milk dries up, then weep quietly as their infants weaken. Elders often give up their share willingly, offering food to the young, whispering that they've lived long enough. Death in these times is not dramatic, it is quiet, drawn out, marked by thin breaths and stillness. Hunger forces movement. You cannot stay where nothing grows, so you walk. Entire bands lift what little they have: spears, hides, firestones, a few gourds of water, and set off. The land is harsh, ash crunches underfoot, rivers are fouled or dried, the air tastes bitter. You follow herds, but the herds are scattered, moving further than you can chase. Sometimes you meet other bands, and what follows depends on desperation. At times you share fire, meat, stories. At times you clash, fighting over a single carcass, leaving blood on grey soil. Roots open and close like wounds. Some groups wander back into Africa's safer pockets, valleys where rains still come. Others press east into Arabia or India, searching for unspoiled land. Many never return. Their bones are left in strange valleys, their footprints erased by ash storms. Yet every migration adds to humanity's story, seeding new regions even in catastrophe. Scientists believe the Toba winter reduced the number of breeding humans to a frightening low, perhaps only a few thousand individuals worldwide. Imagine that. The entire species, every ancestor of yours could have fit inside a single small town today. Each family mattered. Each child born was a victory. Each death was a wound, not only to one band but to the survival of all humanity. You, living through it, would not have known numbers or population estimates, but you would have felt the thinning. Camps once lively now empty. Familiar faces gone, entire families remembered only in stories. When you traveled, you might not see another group for months, sometimes years. The world felt vast, empty, silent. The loneliness itself was heavy, another predator circling. And yet, despite starvation and loss, some strategies kept humanity alive. Cooperation deepened. Food was shared more carefully, no longer hoarded. Fire became a communal task, guarded fiercely. Sparks traded between bands. Skills were passed down with urgency: how to fish with bone hooks, how to dig for hidden tubers, how to stitch furs tighter against cold. Some groups turned to the sea. Along African coasts, bands learned to depend more on shellfish, seaweed and fish. The ocean was less disrupted than the land. Though storms grew harsher and tides unpredictable, the sea remained a fragile but steady source of protein. These coastal survivors may have carried humanity through the bottleneck, their diets rich enough to sustain new generations. Other groups innovated with tools. Stone blades were sharpened thinner, more precise, to waste less meat. Bone needles stitched hides into warmer clothing. Nets and traps appeared, conserving energy that would have been spent in long chases. Creativity became survival. Even ritual had a role. In times of despair, ceremonies offered cohesion. Fires lit in circles, chants rising into grey skies, painted bodies marked with ochre. They gave meaning to suffering. They told you that hunger was not random, that survival was a sacred duty. In a world collapsing, belief kept spirits from collapsing too. Picture an ordinary day in the volcanic winter. Morning begins with cold, stiff bones, ash in your hair, smoke in your lungs. You set out to forage. Hours of digging yield a handful of roots, barely enough for a meal. Hunters return at dusk, weary, sometimes empty-handed. Fire is lit, smoke filling the shelter. A thin stew bubbles in a cracked pot, shared sparingly. Children eat first. Adults chew slowly, stretching each bite. Afterward, you huddle together under furs, not speaking much. Outside, wolves howl. The stars are hidden. You wonder if tomorrow will bring food, or if tomorrow will bring the end. And yet, tomorrow comes. You rise again. You walk again. You hunt again. That cycle, repeated thousands of times by thousands of individuals across continents, was what kept humanity alive. Not glory, not conquest, just stubborn repetition of survival. The volcanic winter lasted years, maybe decades, long enough for generations to live their entire childhoods under dim skies, long enough for populations to collapse, then begin, slowly to rebuild. But in that dark age, humanity was closer to extinction than ever before. One more eruption, one more disease, one more failed season might have ended us. The fact that you are here now, listening, means your ancestors survived that razor's edge. They endured hunger, cold, migration, loneliness. They carried the flame of humanity forward when it seemed ready to die out. Every breath you take is proof of their refusal to quit. So tonight, as you drift into rest, imagine yourself among them, gaunt, weary, but still alive. You share a scrap of food, clutch a small child to your chest, and whisper a story of brighter days. Outside, the volcanic winter rages, but inside, the ember of your species glows on. The volcanic winter presses down, hunger claws at your belly, and every sunrise looks weaker than the one before. Yet out of this crucible came something invisible but lasting, genetic evidence that humanity nearly vanished, the population bottleneck written into your very DNA. Tonight we move from the ash-covered ground into the microscopic inheritance you still carry, the hidden scars of survival after Toba. You already know the numbers are grim. Before Toba, Homo sapiens was never abundant. Tens of thousands at most, scattered in small bands across Africa, Arabia, and South Asia. But after the eruption, the volcanic winter squeezed those numbers to their narrowest point. Some scientists argue that the population shrank to as few as 3,000, 10,000 breeding individuals. Others suggest pockets of survivors may have been larger, but cut off, isolated by geography and famine. Whatever the exact figure, the truth remains. Your species stood on the edge of a cliff, one step from falling into extinction. To put that in perspective, imagine one small town today. Everyone you see, everyone you know, that's it, that's humanity. A handful of bands on the coasts of Africa, in sheltered valleys, along river mouths, the rest gone, erased not by conquest or disease, but by hunger and ash. How do we know this? Because the story of that bottleneck is written inside you. Modern genetics shows that human DNA is strangely uniform. Compared to chimpanzees, gorillas, or even Neanderthals, we are startlingly similar to each other. Any two humans alive today are about 99.9% identical in their genetic code. That's not just coincidence, it's the echo of a time when our diversity was almost erased. When populations shrink drastically, so does genetic variation. Imagine a great tree of life, with many branches representing different family lines. If a fire sweeps through, leaving only a few twigs, then all future growth comes from those twigs. That's what happened with humanity. The eruption of Toba may not have killed every person alive, but it killed enough that only a few lineages continued. You are the descendant of those few survivors, carrying their narrowed genes forward. Geneticists see this bottleneck in haplogroups, clusters of genetic markers shared widely across modern humans, tracing mitochondrial DNA passed down through mothers, and Y chromosome DNA, through fathers. Scientists find that nearly all of humanity can be traced back to small ancestral groups in Africa, about 70,000 years ago. The timing matches the aftermath of Toba perfectly. Think about the weight of that, a planet filled with vast forests, rivers, plains and oceans, and yet all of humanity reduced to numbers, small enough to vanish in a single bad hunting season. It wasn't inevitable that we survived. It wasn't certain. The dice were rolled, and somehow your ancestors clung to the edge. You would not have known it, of course. Sitting by your fire, gnawing on a scrap of shellfish, you weren't calculating gene flow or population collapse. You were just surviving the day. But history in the making doesn't feel like history when you're in it. It feels like scraping by, one hunger pang at a time. Not everyone vanished. Certain groups were lucky or perhaps clever enough to endure. Coastal populations had access to marine resources, shellfish, fish, seaweed. These were less affected by the volcanic winter than plants and land animals. Sheltered valleys provided microclimates where ash didn't smother everything, where rivers still ran clear, where a few edible plants grew. Cooperation mattered too. Groups that shared food, protected the weak, and innovated together had better odds than those torn apart by conflict. Survival was not about strength alone, it was about adaptability. A band that once scorned shellfish might suddenly find them delicious. A hunter who once laughed at roots might now dig them gratefully. Rituals may have played a role, binding groups together when despair threatened to unravel them. Belief gave reason to endure. Every breath you take is proof that someone, somewhere in that volcanic winter, endured. Their genes carried forward. Their stories may be lost, but their blood is not. You carry their resilience in your cells, their stubbornness in your bones. The genetic bottleneck is not just science, it is testimony. Humanity did not die. Humanity shrank, huddled, suffered, but then grew again. And because of that near extinction, we are strangely united. No matter what continent you live on now, your lineage can be traced back to those few survivors. You may think of yourself as American, African, Asian, European, but at the root, you are kin, descended from the same tiny handful of bands that huddled in caves, clung to coasts and prayed for the sun's return. Some scientists even wonder if echoes of this near death survived in stories, flood myths, sky-darkening legends, tales of gods who nearly destroyed humanity. Could these be distant memories of Toba, passed down through millennia in distorted form? We may never know, but the idea is tempting, that your ancestors' trauma lived on, retold at firesides, reshaped until it became myth. Perhaps every time a child heard a story of the sun being stolen or the earth punished, they were hearing a faint echo of Toba's ash-darkened skies. Pause and let this sink in. The difference between your existence and extinction was razor thin. One more eruption, one more disease, one more famine, and there would be no you. The earth would roll on, forests regrowing, animals thriving, but without humans, no art, no cities, no songs, no stories. Silence where we now chatter endlessly. The fact that we survived is not inevitable, it is astonishing. So when you look around at the modern world, skyscrapers, satellites, endless networks of people, remember that it all balanced once on the edge of a knife. A few thousand starving humans huddled in the dark, and from them came everything you see now. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine yourself back in that time, thin, hungry, clinging to your people, unaware that your survival will echo into millions of years to come. You are a carrier of fragile hope, a spark in the ashes of a dying world, and somehow you do not let it go out. The bottleneck has been crossed, humanity has been thinned to threads, but those threads have not snapped. Tonight we step further into the long night of survival, the adaptations both physical and cultural that allowed your ancestors to endure the years of volcanic winter and emerge alive when the odds were against them.
You already know fire was sacred before Toba, but after the eruption it became more than warmth, it became survival itself. The volcanic winter made nights colder, days dimmer, and food scarcer. Fire cooked what little you found, making roots edible, softening hard grains, driving out toxins. Fire scared away predators bold enough to approach starving humans. Fire dried soaked hides and damp wood, keeping shelters livable, and fire was community. Every band circled it at night, huddled together, eyes reflecting the flames while the ash-laden winds hissed outside. Without fire you froze, with it you endured. Sparks were guarded like treasures, bands carried embers across migrations, buried them in ash to keep them alive, fanned them back to life when the group stopped for the night. If embers died, new fire was struck desperately from flint and pyrite, sometimes for hours. Those who mastered it most reliably passed on their knowledge, and their children carried humanity forward. Starvation changes priorities. A lone hunter might once have tried to prove himself by chasing game alone. After Toba, that bravado meant death. Cooperation became essential. Bands coordinated every move. Hunting was done in teams, with runners driving animals toward hidden spears. Foraging was shared, each person bringing what they could, roots, insects, shellfish, into one communal pile. Food was rationed carefully. Children and pregnant women often ate first. Elders sometimes volunteered to eat last, or not at all. Such sacrifices, painful as they were, kept younger generations alive. Bonds tightened. Survival was no longer about the strongest, it was about the most cooperative. Those who learned to trust, share, and work as a group survived. Those who clung to selfishness perished. The volcanic winter forced people to eat what they had once ignored. Shellfish became vital along coasts. Mussels, clams, crabs pried from rocks and roasted on hot stones. Insects became staples. Beetle grubs dug from logs. Locusts, roasted in fires. Termites shaken from mounds. Roots and tubers, bitter and tough, were pounded, soaked and cooked into something barely edible but sustaining. Humans turned scavenger, cracking open animal bones left by predators to suck marrow.
a rich fat that kept bodies alive. Adaptability became the difference between extinction and endurance. If your ancestors were willing to try new foods, they lived. If they clung to old ways and refused the bitter, the strange, the crawling hunger claimed them. The cold was relentless. Even in tropical zones, nights froze where frost had never touched before. Hides became more essential than ever. Bone needles stitched scraps into cloaks, leggings and hoods. Ash-coated winds meant shelters needed reinforcement. Huts were dug deeper, sometimes half buried for insulation. Caves became prized, offering protection not only from weather, but from predators. Smoke from fires blackened ceilings, but it also dried meat hung to preserve it for leaner days. Some groups smeared ochre or ash on their skin, perhaps not just for ritual but as insect repellent, sun protection in the dim but harsh light, or even psychological comfort. In desperate times, every habit had to serve survival. Language, still in its early forms, may have leapt forward in this crucible. Starvation demanded coordination, hunters signaling silently, foragers explaining where roots still grew, elders warning of poisonous plants. The need to plan hunts and ration food forced people to refine words, gestures and meanings. You couldn't waste time with confusion when your life depended on clarity. Stories, too, carried survival. Elders retold which valleys still held water, which rivers turned bitter, which plants sickened the stomach. Memory became a map. Each retelling was not entertainment, but instruction. Here we nearly starved. Here we found fish. Here the rains never came. Through story, survival lessons were preserved, passed down to the next set of children huddling by the fire. When the world seemed to end, meaning had to be created. Rituals deepened. After Toba, fire circles became sacred. Ash painted on bodies marked survivors. Songs, chants, and dances were performed, not just for spirits, but for morale, to keep despair from consuming the group. Burial practices, often with ochre, may have intensified, offering comfort that the dead journeyed onward and the living remained connected. In catastrophe, ritual kept people human. It reminded them that they were more than starving bodies. They were part of a story, part of a lineage, part of something larger than themselves. That sense of belonging may have been as crucial as food. Children were fragile, yet vital. They were the future, the reason to endure. Parents taught them quickly, pressing skills into their hands as soon as they could hold tools. Small hands learned to dig for tubers, to watch for edible leaves, to carry firewood. Childhood shortened, responsibility began early, but laughter still flickered. Even in volcanic winter, children played, throwing pebbles, chasing shadows, imitating adults. Their joy, brief though it was, kept hope alive in the back. Innovation flourished under pressure. Stone blades grew sharper, retouched carefully to last longer. Scrapers cleaned hides faster, saving time and energy. Nets woven from plant fibers trapped fish without exhausting the hunters. Fire-hardened spears pierced deeper. Bone awls and needles allowed tighter stitching. Small changes, perhaps invisible to outsiders, meant the difference between freezing or warmth, starvation or sustenance. Some even argue that catastrophe accelerated human creativity. To survive in a world reshaped by ash, people had to think differently, imagine new solutions, test new ideas. In this crucible, ingenuity became not just helpful but mandatory. But survival was not only physical, it was mental. Starvation warps the mind, filling every thought with food. Cold exhausts will, loss breaks the heart. To live through years of volcanic winter, your ancestors needed not only calories but hope. They needed reasons to rise each morning, reasons to take one more step, reasons not to give up when everything seemed pointless. Those reasons came in small forms: a newborn's cry, a successful hunt after weeks of failure, a story told by firelight, a rare clear day when the sun pierced ash and reminded you the sky was still there. Survival is not one grand act of courage. It is countless tiny choices not to quit. That is the real adaptation, persistence. By the time skies began to clear, humanity had changed. Bands were fewer, smaller, but tougher. They had learned to rely on fire, on each other, on imagination. They had learned that survival was a collective act. They had also learned that the earth could betray them at any moment. That lesson never left. It is written in myth, in ritual, in the careful caution of early humans who treated fire, sky and earth as forces both generous and terrifying. And you carry that legacy still. Your endurance, your creativity, your stubbornness, they were forged in the volcanic winter. They are not accidents. they are inheritance. As you drift tonight, imagine yourself as one of those survivors. Your belly is empty, your cloak thin, but your fire burns. You sit with your people, whispering stories, teaching children, guarding sparks against the ash-filled wind. Outside, the volcanic winter howls. Inside, humanity endures, adapting in 1,000 small ways, carrying forward the fragile miracle of survival. The volcanic winter has tightened its grip. People huddle in caves, scraping roots and shellfish, clinging to fire and one another. But remember, humans were not alone in this world. Tonight we shift your gaze outward, to the other species who shared this planet, Neanderthals, Denisovans and megafauna, and how they too were caught in the shadow of Toba. Far from Sumatra, in the cold forests and steppes of Ice Age Europe, Neanderthals thrived before the eruption. Stocky, broad-chested, their bodies were built for cold. They hunted reindeer, bison, and woolly rhinoceroses with sturdy spears. They took shelter in limestone caves, their fires glowing against walls decorated with simple carvings. For tens of thousands of years, they had ruled these northern lands. But the volcanic winter did not spare them. The cooling that followed Toba struck Europe brutally. Forests thinned, prey grew scarce, and winters lengthened into hunger seasons. Neanderthals, already adapted to harsh conditions, might have seemed better suited than Homo sapiens. Yet their numbers were never great, and their territories were limited. The loss of herds hit them as hard as it hit you. Imagine a Neanderthal family in a cave in southern France, waiting out a winter that does not end. Their hunts return empty. Children cry in hunger. Smoke fills the cave as fires struggle against damp wood. They endure with grit, but even they are stretched thin. While Neanderthals survived the eruption, their population may have dipped sharply. Some bands disappeared, others retreated southward. The seeds of their eventual decline may have been sown here, in the volcanic winter. Farther east, in the highlands of Central Asia and Siberia, lived another cousin, Denisovans. You know them today only from a few fragments of bone, a tooth, a sliver of DNA preserved in caves, but in their time, they were real, breathing, enduring. They roamed forests of larch and pine, rivers thick with fish, mountains echoing with wolves. The eruption reached them too. Ash spread over Asia, dimming skies, poisoning rivers. Cold deepened in their already icy homelands. Food grew scarce, bands shrank. Yet Denisovans endured for millennia after Toba, leaving their genetic imprint in you today, especially if your ancestry traces to Asia or Oceania. They adapted, interbred with Homo sapiens, and left their mark in traits that help modern highlanders breathe thin air. Still, the eruption must have wounded them deeply, shrinking their numbers and pushing them into tighter refuges. And then there were the giants, the megafauna, mammoths with tusks curling like ivory moons, woolly rhinoceroses, armored in shaggy hides, saber-toothed cats, their fangs gleaming in twilight hunts, ground sloths lumbering across South America, diprotodons grazing in Australia, aurochs thundering across Eurasia. Before Toba, they dominated landscapes, feeding human imagination and fear alike. After Toba, their numbers faltered. The ash-smothered grazing lands, grasslands turned grey deserts, herds starved by the thousands. Carnivores, once majestic hunters, became gaunt scavengers, fighting over carcasses. Entire species teetered on the brink. Though many megafauna survived Toba, only to vanish later, the eruption was a brutal blow, thinning populations, scattering herds, and leaving ecosystems fractured. Imagine a mammoth herd in the steppes of northern India. Ash coats the ground, calves stumble, their trunks searching for grass that no longer grows. The matriarch bellows, leading them onward, but every step brings thinner pasture. Wolves circle. One calf collapses, too weak to rise. The herd marches on, diminished. For you, starving in a nearby valley, the mammoth's fate is your fate too. Their survival was tied to yours. What unites all these species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, mammoths, saber-tooths, is that they too lived through the same darkness. The skies dimmed for them as well, the rivers turned bitter, the cold bit deeper. Humanity was not singled out for punishment. The entire web of life strained under the volcanic winter. Some species bent and recovered, others cracked and disappeared. For you, this meant living in a world of fewer allies and fewer threats. Some predators vanished, easing your hunts. Some prey dwindled, starving you further. The balance was shifting in ways no one could predict. The eruption may also have shaped how Homo sapiens interacted with Neanderthals and Denisovans. When resources are scarce, competition sharpens. A hunting ground once large enough for both species may suddenly sustain neither. Did fights erupt? Did bands clash over carcasses or waterholes? Possibly, but cooperation may also have occurred. Perhaps bands exchanged food, mates, or knowledge. Perhaps survival blurred the lines between species, leading to interbreeding that still lives in your genes. In the end, Neanderthals and Denisovans survived Toba, but weakened. Their populations shrank, their range contracted. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens, battered but stubborn, began to spread once more after the skies cleared. The eruption had thinned all species, but your kind proved most adaptable, most cooperative, most persistent. It was not that you were stronger, it was that you were relentless. From this shared catastrophe, your ancestors learned something vital, that survival is not solitary, it is a web, a network. You depend on animals, plants, rivers, fire, each other, and when one thread snaps, the whole web trembles. Toba taught humanity that the world could change overnight, and that only flexibility, creativity, and community could carry you through. As you let your eyes close tonight, imagine the broader world. In one cave, a Neanderthal mother sings softly to a starving child. In another, Denisovan hunters scrape hides, their fire dim. On the steppe, mammoths march onward, gaunt but unbroken. And in Africa, your own ancestors huddle by the sea, prying shellfish from rocks, whispering that the sun will return. Different species, different shapes, but all enduring the same volcanic night. And somehow, against all odds, your lineage was among those that made it through. The skies are still dim, the ground still grey, but time moves on. Slowly, painfully, the eruption's most violent phase fades, and the Earth begins its long recovery. Tonight you walk through the regrowth of ecosystems, the return of warmth, and the fragile rebound of life after the Toba catastrophe. For years it seemed the volcanic winter would never end. Ash storms circled the globe, rains came sour. Frost bit even in the tropics, but nothing in nature is permanent, not even catastrophe. The sulfur aerosols that dimmed the sun began to fall away, washed down by storms, settled into oceans. Slowly sunlight pierced the haze. It was weak at first, a faint shimmer through grey clouds, but it grew stronger. Days lengthened, frost retreated, the long night was breaking. Imagine the moment you notice it. One morning, after years of twilight, you see a patch of blue sky, just a crack, a thin sliver between ash clouds, but it is enough to make your heart race. The sun looks brighter, warmer. The fire in your belly, that hunger couldn't extinguish, flares into hope. The world is not finished. Volcanic ash is destruction in the short term, but fertilizer in the long. Ash is rich with minerals, iron, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus. Once rains wash away the acidity, once seeds find purchase in the grey dust, life returns explosively. Forests, that seemed forever dead, suddenly sprout green. Mosses, lichens, and hardy grasses appear first. Thin carpets over ash plains, then shrubs, then trees. Within decades, valleys that were wastelands glow green again. For you this means food. Roots fatten in the softened soil, fruits ripen, grazing returns for animals. Herds follow the grass, and hunters follow the herds. Slowly the famine lifts, not fully, not everywhere, but enough to tip the balance back towards survival. Water, once poisoned, clears, streams cut new channels through ash beds, lakes refill with clearer water, fish return, frogs croak again at night, crocodiles slide back into rivers, the lifeblood of ecosystems pulses again. Imagine your relief the first time you catch fish fat enough to feed the band, the first time children drink from a stream without gagging, the first time you see reeds growing again at a lakeshore. And at the heart of Sumatra, the collapsed caldera fills with water. Lake Toba is born, vast and gleaming, a reminder of destruction and renewal in one. Where fire once roared, now ripples spread under the sun. The megafauna that staggered through ash and famine begin to recover. Herds of antelope return to savannas, mammoths graze steppes where grass pushes through snow, deer spread in Asia, elephants in Africa. With them come predators, lions, wolves, tigers, leopards. Their cries once again echo across valleys. For you, this is both danger and salvation. Animals mean food, but they also mean hunters of a different kind are back to test your vigilance. Smaller animals rebound faster, rodents multiply in grasses, birds return to forests, their songs once again filling dawn air, insects swarm in new vegetation. the buzzing, croaking, chirping chorus of life rises, and for the first time in years the silence of ash is broken. For humans, recovery is slow but real. Bands that had clung to coasts or valleys now explore farther. They test old hunting grounds, find them green again and resettle. Populations begin to rise. Infants born in this brighter world grow stronger. Elders live longer. Camps swell from a handful of starving families to dozens of people again. With relief comes new possibilities. Hunger once left no room for anything but survival. Now with food more stable, hands have time for carving beads, painting with ochre, shaping tools more carefully. Storytelling flourishes, myths expanding to explain not only hunger but survival and rebirth. Rituals of thanks join rituals of desperation. Humanity begins to imagine not only how to endure, but how to live. The world after Toba is not the same as before. Ash reshaped rivers, altered coastlines, buried valleys, entire forests never regrew, but new landscapes emerged. Fertile plains appeared in places that were once barren, lakes sparkled where mountains collapsed. The earth, scarred, had remade itself. For you this meant relearning. Old trails no longer worked, new rivers blocked paths. Animals migrated differently. You had to map the land anew, guided by elders but also by fresh discoveries. Each journey carried both risk and wonder. Perhaps, around the fires you told stories of the dark years. You warned children of the time when the sun vanished, when ash fell like snow, when hunger ruled. You painted symbols on cave walls, spirals, hands, suns, marking memory of what happened. You might not have known the science, but you knew the truth. The world could change overnight. That memory, etched into stories and rituals, became part of humanity's inheritance. In surviving, you gained more than numbers. You gained resilience. You learned that starvation could be outlasted, that cooperation was stronger than selfishness, that innovation was not luxury but necessity. You emerged tougher, more resourceful, more bonded. The catastrophe that nearly erased you had also refined you. Humanity was tempered like metal in fire. So as you rest tonight, picture yourself in that world of regrowth. The sun is brighter now, grass pushes through ash, a herd of deer grazes nearby. Your people are thinner than you remember, scarred but alive. Children laugh again. Fires crackle not with desperation but with warmth. You breathe deeply, and for the first time in years the air tastes of life instead of ash. The world is not healed, not fully, but it is healing, and so are you. The forests are greening again, rivers flow clearer, and herds return to the plains. Humanity is no longer starving every day, but you are not the same people who faced the sky of ash. Tonight you step into the long-term resilience of humans after Toba, how surviving groups adapted, spread and carried forward the lessons carved into their bones by fire, hunger and cold. Think again of how close the knife edge was. Perhaps only a few thousand breeding individuals remained worldwide. That means every child mattered, every family's survival shifted the fate of the entire species. The survivors were clustered in refuges, along the coasts of Africa, in sheltered valleys near rivers, and maybe even pockets of South Asia where resources held out. These bands were not thriving, they were scraping through, counting calories, rationing, watching the skies, but they were alive, and from them over millennia came all of us. Every person alive today can trace their ancestry back to those who endured when others vanished. As ecosystems recovered, so did people. When rivers filled with fish again, when grasses drew herds back, when fruits ripened on trees, bands grew larger, more children survived infancy, more elders lived long enough to teach and tell stories. Instead of shrinking, the human family began slowly to swell. It was not rapid, a few more survivors here, another child living into adulthood there, but over generations it compounded. What once was thousands became tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. But this rebound was cautious. Your ancestors remembered famine. They remembered what it meant when the world turned gray. Even as populations grew, caution stayed woven into choices, storing food, moving carefully, preparing for lean times. The trauma of Toba lingered as an invisible teacher. The eruption had scattered bands, forced migrations, and broken old roots. In recovery, that mobility became an asset. Humans no longer thought of themselves as tied to one valley or one river. They learned that survival meant movement, exploration, risk. If the land faltered, you could move. If prey vanished, you could follow. If storms grew worse, you could seek shelter elsewhere. This instinct to move, to adapt to new lands, is part of why humanity later spread across every continent. Hunger had taught that selfishness doomed groups. Those who hoarded perished, those who shared endured. This lesson became culture. Food-sharing rituals grew deeper. Cooperation was valued, expected. A successful hunter gained prestige not for what he ate himself but for what he fed the band. Leaders emerged not as tyrants but as coordinators, guiding hunts, rationing food, keeping the fragile group together. That shift from survival by individuals to survival by communities changed everything. It meant larger groups could function. It meant trust could spread beyond families. It meant alliances could form. Humanity, once fragmented, was beginning to knit into something greater than scattered bands. Scarcity forced creativity. After the eruption, every tool, every idea mattered. Firemaking improved. Stone blades grew sharper and more specialized. Nets and traps multiplied. Clothing was stitched tighter, decorated not only for warmth but for identity. Ochre painting deepened, perhaps as both ritual and instruction. When food was slightly more abundant, hands could turn again to art. The first flourishes of symbolic behavior, beads, carvings, body paint, surged after bottlenecks. Why? Because survival had taught that meaning was not optional. Rituals had kept spirits alive in famine. Now they blossomed into richer traditions. You painted not only to remember hunger, but to celebrate survival. As populations grew back, humans began to spread again, into Arabia, following coastlines rich with shellfish, into South Asia, finding forests healed, into new parts of Africa, reclaiming valleys once poisoned by ash. Over thousands of years this rebound became migration waves. By 60,000 BCE, your descendants were pushing into Southeast Asia, Australia, and eventually Europe. October had nearly ended you, but in the long view it sharpened you for expansion. The survivors were not ordinary, they were the toughest, the most adaptable, the most cooperative. That resilience carried outward, propelling humans into every ecosystem on Earth. You may not have had writing, but memory is long in oral cultures. The eruption, the hunger, the darkness, these would have been told and retold around fires. Stories of a sky that vanished, of rivers that soured, of spirits that punished, of survival against impossible odds. Over generations these tales hardened into myths. Perhaps they shaped flood legends, sun-stealing myths, gods of fire and ash. Even if distorted, they carried the warning, the world can betray you but you must endure. After Toba, humans did not see themselves as masters of nature. They saw themselves as fragile, dependent, vulnerable. Fire was honored, rivers were sacred, animals were respected, even when hunted. Rituals to the sun, moon and earth may trace to this era, gratitude to forces that could just as easily destroy as sustain. This humility was survival. By acknowledging the power of nature, by embedding respect into culture, humans created mental armor against despair. When the earth shakes or skies darken, it is not random, it has meaning, and meaning makes suffering endurable. By the time the skies cleared fully, by the time forests regrew and rivers ran clear, humanity had changed. You were no longer simply animals surviving, you were survivors who had stared into extinction and refused to fall. Every child born after was living proof of victory, not over nature, but alongside it. And though numbers remained small, the trajectory had shifted. Instead of dwindling, you were growing. Instead of shrinking back, you were moving outward. The bottleneck was the low tide of humanity. The rebound was the flood that would eventually carry you to every corner of the earth. As you close your eyes now, imagine yourself in that recovering world. The sun shines brighter, grasses ripple in the wind, a herd grazes nearby, children play by a river, their laughter returning to a land once silent. You are scarred, yes, but alive. And more than alive, you are ready to grow, to spread, to imagine futures beyond famine. The earth tested you, nearly erased you, but in surviving, you became something stronger, something resilient enough to shape the millennia to come. The ash has settled, the forests regrown, and humanity has begun to spread again, but the shadow of Toba has never fully left. Tonight we close this long story with the legacy of the supervolcano, how its memory echoes in science, myth, and the quiet resilience of humanity itself. Lake Toba still lies in Sumatra, a gleaming wound filled with water. From the air it looks serene, a vast blue mirror, framed by green hills. Tourists today marvel at its beauty, unaware they are looking at the grave of an apocalypse. Beneath its surface are the remains of the collapsed caldera, the scar of the eruption that nearly ended humanity. Every ripple on that lake is a whisper of the fire that once darkened skies across continents. Geologists see more than a lake. They see layers of ash in India, 3,000 kilometers away, proof of how far the eruption's hand reached. They see traces of sulfur in ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica, evidence that the volcanic winter was global. The Earth remembers, even if most people do not. You carry the eruption in your blood. Geneticists reading your DNA find the bottleneck, the narrowing of diversity around 70,000 years ago. That narrowing is a fingerprint of Toba. Humanity almost vanished, but did not. Every time you look at another person, no matter how different they seem, know this: your ancestors huddled together in the same twilight world, descendants of the same fragile bands that survived. You are family, bound by ash and fire. The eruption happened long before written words, but stories have long memories. Across cultures, myths tell of suns darkened, floods of fire, winters that never ended. Ancient Indian legends speak of skies blackened for years. Australian Aboriginal tales describe great fires and long darkness. Myths of apocalypse, of gods punishing, of earth ending, may all carry echoes of Toba. The details warped over tens of thousands of years, but the essence remained. The world can change overnight. Perhaps even flood myths, Noah, Utnapishtim, Manu, carry faint shadows of volcanic storms, tsunamis and endless rain seeded by ash. Perhaps fire gods in every culture, from Pele in Hawaii to Agni in India, are distant grandchildren of that eruption, personifications of the fire that nearly erased humanity. Toba's greatest legacy is the reminder of fragility. You think of yourself as master of the earth, builders of cities, makers of machines, dreamers who touch the stars. But all of that rests on survival bought 70,000 years ago by a handful of people who endured hunger and cold. One more eruption, one more famine, and it could have ended differently. The earth has the power to unmake you in an instant. But fragility is not weakness. Fragility paired with resilience is strength. Your ancestors did not control the eruption. They could not stop ash from falling, or skies from dimming, but they adapted, endured, persisted. That persistence is your inheritance. Genetics shows what the eruption forced: unity. Humanity was narrowed to a few thousand. From them came all of us, every language, every culture, every skin tone. We are branches of the same small tree that survived in volcanic winter. The divisions you see today, nations, tribes, religions, are recent. Beneath them you are one family, bound by the memory of survival. In modern times, scientists study Toba not only to understand the past but to warn the future. Other supervolcanoes exist: Yellowstone in the United States, Taupo in New Zealand, Era in Japan. Each has the potential someday to erupt on a scale rivaling Toba. They may not erupt in your lifetime, or even in thousands of years, but they remind you that the earth is alive, restless, unpredictable. Studying Toba is not morbid curiosity, it is preparation. The ash layers in India, the sulfur traces in polar ice, the DNA bottleneck, all are puzzle pieces, and together they tell you it happened once, it can happen again. And knowing that is part of resilience. Even without science, people remembered. Rituals of fire, of sun, of renewal after darkness are common across cultures. Perhaps each time humans lit a fire at night and told a story of the sun's return, they were echoing Toba, thanking the world for not ending. The legacy of survival became embedded in culture, shaping how people treated nature, how they prepared for famine, how they imagined gods. Think of it this way: Toba was not only a disaster, it was a forge. The survivors were not ordinary. They were the toughest, most adaptable, most cooperative humans alive. They carried forward traits